Nancy Arnold noticed the shoes first. Italian leather, polished to a mirror finish, motionless in her peripheral vision as she signed the intake paperwork at the reception desk. She told herself it meant nothing. Rich people existed. They got sick. They stood in hospital corridors just like everyone else. Except these shoes didn't move. Not when the receptionist called another patient, not when a gurney rolled past, not when Nancy finished her signature and tucked her insurance card back into her wallet with fingers that suddenly felt too aware of themselves. The shoes just stood there, 20 feet down the corridor, pointed in her direction. Nancy kept her eyes on the clipboard, her pen, the pale green walls that were trying very hard to look calming and failing spectacularly. Hospitals always smelled like industrial disinfectant and broken promises. She'd been joking about it in her head all morning. At least the coffee's terrible, so my expectations are already low. But the humor wasn't landing anymore, because those shoes were still there. She risked a glance. The shoes were attached to charcoal trousers, a black suit jacket, open, no tie. The kind of tailoring that didn't announce itself, just existed with quiet inevitability. Nancy's gaze traveled upward and stopped. Her breath caught somewhere between her lungs and her throat, a physical thing she could feel solidifying. Stephanologia. 5 months. She had gone 5 months without seeing that face, 5 months convincing herself that memory had exaggerated the sharp line of his jaw, the unreadable calm in his dark eyes. The way his presence didn't demand attention, it simply claimed it. Memory had not exaggerated. If anything, memory had been kind. He stood at the end of the corridor like he'd been carved from stone and placed there deliberately. Still. Controlled. Watching her with the same unsettling focus she remembered from that night, the night she'd convinced herself meant nothing to him, because men like that didn't remember women like her. Their eyes met. Nancy forgot how to breathe properly. His gaze dropped. Slowly, deliberately, to her stomach. Pause for 1 second. If you were 5 months pregnant, walking into a hospital for a routine checkup, and you suddenly saw the man you shared one unforgettable night with standing there, powerful, unreadable, and completely unprepared for the truth, what would you do? Would you turn and run, or face him? Tell me in the comments, and don't forget to say where you're watching from, because I want to know how far Nancy and Stefano's story reaches. And if you love intense mafia romances filled with secrets, tension, and slow-burning obsession, like this video, subscribe to Bella Romance Stories, and stay with me, because what happens next will change everything. The air in the corridor changed, thickened, became something she had to push through just to stay upright. Nancy's hand moved instinctively to her belly, a defensive gesture she'd been doing unconsciously for weeks now. The slight swell was hidden beneath her oversized sweater, invisible to anyone who didn't know to look. Stefano knew to look. He didn't move, didn't speak. His expression remained perfectly, devastatingly neutral, but his eyes were doing math. Nancy felt her heart hammering against her ribs, each beat too loud, too obvious. The receptionist was saying something about waiting rooms and appointment times, but the words were just noise now, meaningless static. Because Stephanologia was here, in this hospital, looking at her like she was an equation he'd just solved. She wanted to run. She wanted to laugh. She wanted to ask him if he was kidding right now, if the universe had a sick sense of humor, or if she'd done something terrible in a past life to deserve this level of cosmic irony. Instead, she stood frozen, one hand still pressed protectively against her stomach, while a man she'd spent one reckless night with 5 months ago stared at her like she'd just rewritten every plan he'd ever made. A nurse passed between them, clipboard in hand, sensible shoes squeaking against the linoleum. Stefano didn't look away. Nancy's brain was screaming at her to move, to say something, to do anything other than stand there like prey caught in headlights. But her body wasn't listening, because Stefano was moving now, not quickly, not urgently, just inevitably, 3 steps closer, then 4, each movement controlled, purposeful, like he'd already calculated the exact distance needed. He stopped 6 feet away, close enough that Nancy could see the faint shadow of exhaustion beneath his eyes, close enough that she could smell something expensive and understated, sandalwood, maybe, or cedar, close enough that when he spoke, his voice was low enough that only she could hear it. Nancy. Her name in his mouth felt like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known existed. Stefano. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. Small miracle. Funny meeting you here. His gaze flicked down to her stomach again, back to her face. 5 months, he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Nancy swallowed. Give or take. Give or take, he repeated, and something in his tone made her skin prickle. She forced herself to meet his eyes. I had an appointment. You're, visiting someone? No. The single word hung between them, heavy with implication. Nancy's pulse was doing something complicated and unhelpful. So you're here for business, Stefano said. Then, after a pause that felt deliberate, an injury. Nothing serious. Nothing serious. Right. Because men who looked like him, who moved like him, definitely got injured doing normal, non-terrifying things. She should leave. She should make an excuse. Grab her bag and walk out of this hospital before what? Before he asked? Before she had to say it out loud? Stefano shifted slightly, and Nancy realized with a jolt that he'd positioned himself between her and the rest of the corridor. Not aggressively, not obviously, just there. A nurse approached, young and efficient, tablet in hand. She glanced at Stefano, then at Nancy, then back to Stefano with the particular hesitation of someone who'd learned to read a room quickly. Mr. Loggia, the doctor can see you now if you're— A moment, Stefano said, not looking at her. The nurse nodded and retreated. Nancy's throat felt tight. You should go. Should I? It wasn't a question that time either. She lifted her chin, forcing herself to hold his gaze. I'm fine. I have an appointment. You have an appointment. We don't need to— Is it mine? The question landed like a physical blow. Nancy's breath hitched. She wanted to lie, wanted to laugh it off, make a joke about terrible timing and cosmic coincidences. But Stefano was looking at her with those dark, unreadable eyes, and she knew that he'd already done the math, already counted the weeks, already reached the same inescapable conclusion she'd been living with for 2 months. Before she could answer, another nurse appeared, older, no nonsense, with a different tablet and a practiced smile. Ms. Arnold, we're ready for you in— She paused, noticing Stefano. Her smile became more cautious. Oh, I'm sorry. Is this— should I— Stefano didn't look away from Nancy. But when he spoke, his voice carried that same quiet authority that made people listen without understanding why. Yes, the nurse led them to a consultation room. Not the exam room Nancy had been expecting. No paper-covered table, no motivational posters about prenatal vitamins. Just 4 walls, 2 chairs, and a desk with nothing on it. The door closed with a quiet click that felt louder than it should have. Nancy remained standing. Stefano waited by the window, hands in his pockets, looking out at the parking lot below. He didn't fill the space aggressively, didn't pace or loom or do any of the things men did when they wanted you to feel small. He just stood there, and somehow that was worse. So, Nancy said, because silence felt like quicksand. Is this the part where you ask if I'm sure? No. No? Stefano turned from the window. I'm not going to ask if you're sure. Why not? Because you wouldn't be here if you weren't. Nancy crossed her arms. A defensive gesture she immediately regretted because it made her look exactly as uncertain as she felt. Maybe I'm here for something else. Maybe the timing is just— May 14th, Stefano said quietly. Nancy's breath caught. A Friday, he continued, voice even. You were wearing a gray sweater. You'd had a bad day at work, something about a client who couldn't decide between two identical fabric samples. Her throat felt tight. You remember that? I remember everything. The words landed with unexpected weight. Nancy forced herself to hold his gaze. Congratulations, you have a good memory. That doesn't mean 22 weeks, Stefano said, give or take a few days. You could have been with someone else. His tone didn't change, but you weren't. It wasn't a question. Nancy's pulse was doing something complicated. You don't know that. Yes, Stefano said calmly. I do. The certainty in his voice made her skin prickle, like he'd been keeping track, like he'd thought about that night more than once in the past 5 months, like maybe she hadn't been as forgettable as she'd convinced herself. Okay, Nancy said, dropping her arms. Fine, you've done the math, you've worked out the timeline, that still doesn't give you the right to know? Stefano moved away from the window, not closer to her, just into a position where she couldn't avoid looking at him. Or the right to be here? Both. Why? The question was so direct, so stripped of pretense, that Nancy almost laughed. Are you seriously asking me why I didn't track down a man I spent one night with to tell him I got pregnant? Yes. Nancy stared at him. Because it was one night, Stefano. One night where we both knew exactly what it was. You left at 4 a.m. I didn't ask for your number. You didn't offer it. We had an agreement. We had honesty, Stefano corrected quietly. For 6 hours. That's more than most people manage in a lifetime. Nancy felt something twist in her chest, a feeling she absolutely did not have time for right now. That doesn't change what this is. You don't owe me anything. I don't owe you. You're carrying my child. The words hung between them, simple and devastating. Nancy swallowed. Biology doesn't make you a father. No, Stefano agreed. But it makes this my responsibility. I didn't ask for your responsibility. You didn't ask for any of this. The gentleness in his tone was somehow more unsettling than if he'd been angry. Nancy had prepared herself for anger, for accusations, for demands. She hadn't prepared for this quiet certainty that made her feel like the ground was shifting beneath her feet. I'm fine on my own, she said, hating how defensive it sounded. Are you? Yes. Stefano was quiet for a moment. Then, who knows? Nancy blinked. What? About the pregnancy. Who knows? I don't see how that's... Humor me. She wanted to tell him it was none of his business, wanted to walk out of this room and pretend the past 10 minutes hadn't happened, but something in his eyes stopped her. Not threat, not demand, just attention. Complete, undivided attention that made her feel like her answer actually mattered to him. My co-worker, Nancy said finally, Sarah, and my landlord, because I had to explain why I was taking more sick days. No family? Not nearby. Stefano nodded slowly, absorbing this. And you plan to do this alone? It wasn't a question, but Nancy answered anyway. Yes. Why? Because... Nancy stopped, started again. Because I'm not going to raise a child in whatever world you come from. There it was. Out loud. The truth she'd been circling for 2 months. Stefano's expression didn't change. What world is that? Don't, Nancy said quietly. Don't pretend you're a normal businessman who happened to need stitches at 7 a.m. I looked you up, Stefano. After that night. I know who you are. Do you? Enough. Enough to judge? Enough to know that my child deserves better than growing up afraid. The words came out sharper than she'd intended, raw and honest. Stefano was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than before. And you think I would let my child be afraid? Nancy met his eyes. I think you live in a world where fear is currency, where people get hurt, where... She gestured vaguely at his torso, where she knew beneath that expensive suit was the fresh injury he'd mentioned. Where you end up in hospitals at dawn getting injuries treated that you can't explain. I can explain them. To who? The police you probably have in your pocket? Stefano's mouth almost curved. You've been watching too many films. Have I? He didn't answer. Nancy felt exhaustion settling into her bones. I'm not trying to keep you from knowing or being involved if that's what you want, but I need you to understand that I'm not interested in becoming part of something dangerous. You already are. The words were soft, factual. Nancy felt ice slide down her spine. What? The moment you walked into this hospital carrying my child, you became part of something dangerous. Stefano's voice remained calm, almost gentle. That's not a threat, Nancy. That's reality. Because of you. Yes. The honesty of it was almost worse than if he'd tried to lie. Nancy's hand moved unconsciously to her stomach. Then I'll leave. I'll go somewhere. Where? Stefano asked quietly. Where do you think you can go that I won't find you? That others won't find you? Others. The word landed with sickening clarity. You're trying to scare me, Nancy said, but her voice wavered. I'm trying to be honest. Stefano took a single step closer, not threatening, just present. You wanted me to stay away, to let you handle this alone. I understand that impulse, but it's not possible anymore. Because you won't let it be? Because the world I live in doesn't care what you want. Nancy felt her heart hammering. So what? You're just going to force me to, what? Come with you? Accept protection I didn't ask for? Yes. The single word dropped like a stone. Nancy stared at him. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. I have a job, an apartment, a life that doesn't involve... All of which can be maintained, Stefano said calmly. With adjustments. Adjustments, Nancy repeated, almost laughing. You mean surveillance, control. I mean safety. Your version of safety. The only version that matters. Nancy felt anger flare, hot and clarifying. You don't get to decide that. Yes, Stefano said quietly. I do. The certainty in his voice was absolute, not cruel, not even particularly threatening, just final, like he'd already made calculations she couldn't see, already moved pieces on a board she didn't know she was playing on. Nancy's hands curled into fists. You can't just... I can, Stefano said, and I will. He moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. When he looked back at her, something in his expression softened almost imperceptibly. I'm not your enemy, Nancy, but I'm not going to let anything happen to you or that child, not because you want my protection. Because you need it whether you believe it or not. And if I refuse? Stefano's gaze held hers for a long moment. Then he opened the door, and Nancy saw what she hadn't noticed before. 2 men in dark suits standing in the corridor. Not hospital security. His men. You're not leaving this building alone, Stefano said quietly. Then he stepped into the hallway, and Nancy realized with cold clarity that her choice had already been made for her. Nancy's apartment was 12 miles from the hospital. She knew this because she'd mapped it carefully when choosing her obstetrician. 12 miles meant 20 minutes in light traffic, 35 in rush hour. A manageable distance. A safe distance. She mentioned this to Stefano as they walked toward the elevator. He didn't respond. The 2 men in suits, his men, because Nancy was done pretending otherwise, flanked them at a distance that looked casual and felt anything but. One walked ahead, checking corners. The other stayed behind, a shadow Nancy could feel without seeing. I have a car, Nancy said when they reached the parking garage. I drove here. I can drive myself. No. Stefano's hand settled at the small of her back, not gripping, not pulling, just there, steady, warm through the fabric of her sweater. Nancy stopped walking. I'm not getting in your car. Yes, you are. This is kidnapping. This is precaution. Stefano's voice remained maddeningly calm. "Your car will be delivered to your apartment this afternoon." "How do you even know where—" Nancy stopped, felt something cold settle in her stomach. "You had me followed." It wasn't a question. Stefano didn't deny it. Nancy pulled away from his touch. "How long? Does it matter?" "Yes, it matters. How long have you—" She stopped as understanding crashed over her. "Since that night. You've been watching me since that night." "Not watching," Stefano said quietly. "Aware." "That's not better. It's honest." Nancy wanted to scream, wanted to run, wanted to do literally anything except stand in a parking garage arguing semantics with a man who thought surveillance was a reasonable approach to human interaction. But she was also exhausted and hungry, and the baby was doing that thing where it pressed against her bladder at exactly the wrong moment. "Fine," she said, hating every syllable. "Take me home. But then you leave." Stefano's expression didn't change. "We'll see." The car was black, expensive, the kind of vehicle that probably had bulletproof windows and no visible license plates. Nancy didn't ask. One of the suited men opened the rear door. Stefano gestured for her to enter first. She did, mostly because standing in a parking garage felt increasingly vulnerable, and at least inside the car she could pretend she had some measure of control. Stefano slid in beside her. The door closed with a heavy, final sound. The interior smelled like leather and something else, something distinctly Stefano. Cedar, maybe. Or sandalwood. The same scent she remembered from 5 months ago, when she'd been foolish enough to think one night with a stranger wouldn't have consequences. The car pulled out smoothly. Nancy focused on her breathing, in through her nose, out through her mouth, the technique her pregnancy app recommended for anxiety. It wasn't working. "You don't have to be afraid," Stefano said quietly. Nancy turned to look at him. "You just told me I'm in danger because I'm carrying your child. What exactly should I be feeling?" "Protected. By you." "Yes. The person who created the danger in the first place." Stefano was quiet for a moment. "Yes." The honesty of it was almost worse than if he'd tried to argue. Nancy looked out the window, watching the city slide past. They were heading north, which was right, toward her neighborhood. That was something. "What happened to you?" she asked, suddenly. Stefano's gaze shifted to her. "When?" "This morning. The injury you were at the hospital for." "Business." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer you need." Nancy's jaw tightened. "If I'm supposed to trust you with my safety, don't you think I deserve to know what kind of business leaves you bleeding?" "No." The single word was delivered without heat. Just fact. Nancy felt frustration building. "You can't just—" "I can," Stefano said quietly. "And I will. There are parts of my world you don't need to see, Nancy." "Parts I won't let you see?" "Because you're protecting me?" "Yes." "Or because you're protecting yourself?" Something flickered in Stefano's expression, too fast to read, gone before Nancy could interpret it. "Both," he said finally. The honesty surprised her into silence. They drove for another 2 minutes before Nancy noticed. The car was slowing down, not stopping, just moving more carefully, deliberately. The man in the passenger seat, not the driver, shifted in his seat, said something low in Italian. Stefano's posture changed, not dramatically, not obviously, just sharpened. Nancy's pulse quickened. "What's wrong?" "Nothing." "You're lying." Stefano's hand moved to his phone. He typed something one-handed, gaze still on the road ahead. "We're taking a different route." "Why?" "Precaution." That word again. Nancy was starting to hate it. She looked out the rear window, saw nothing unusual, just normal traffic, normal people living normal lives, except one car seemed to be maintaining the same distance behind them. Black sedan, tinted windows, like theirs. "Someone's following us," Nancy said, hating how her voice wavered. "Not anymore," Stefano said. The driver made a sudden turn. Smooth, controlled, but fast enough that Nancy had to brace herself against the seat. The black sedan didn't follow. But 2 blocks later, a different car appeared in the rearview mirror. Gray this time. Same tinted windows. Nancy's mouth went dry. Stefano. I see it. His voice remained calm, but his hand had moved to rest on the seat between them, close to her, not touching, but ready to. The man in the passenger seat spoke again, rapid Italian, low and urgent. Stefano responded in the same language, then switched to English. How many? 2 vehicles, maybe 3. Nancy felt her heartbeat in her throat. Who are they? People who don't concern you. People who are following us concern me very much. Stefano's gaze finally shifted to her, direct, assessing. Are you going to panic? Nancy wanted to laugh, or scream. I'm considering it. Don't. That's not helpful advice. It's the only advice that matters. Stefano's hand moved fractionally closer to her, still not touching. Stay calm, stay quiet. Let me handle this. Handle what? What are they? The car accelerated, not recklessly, not dramatically, just faster, purposeful. Nancy's hand automatically went to her stomach, protective instinct overriding everything else. Stefano noticed. His expression softened almost imperceptibly. Nothing's going to happen to you, he said quietly. You can't promise that. Yes, Stefano said, I can. The certainty in his voice should have been reassuring. Instead, it made Nancy understand something she'd been avoiding since the hospital. This wasn't theoretical danger. This wasn't Stefano being paranoid or controlling. This was real. People were actually following them, actually hunting because that's what this felt like. A hunt. And she was the target. Or the baby was. Or both. I'm going to be sick, Nancy said. No, you're not. That's not something you get to decide. Breathe, Stefano said. Not a command, an instruction. In through your nose, count to 4. Nancy wanted to tell him to shove his breathing exercises. Instead, she did what he said. Because what else could she do? The car made another turn, then another. The cityscape outside became less familiar. Streets she didn't recognize, buildings she'd never seen. Where are we going? Nancy asked. Somewhere safe. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have right now. Nancy looked at him, really looked at him, saw the tension in his jaw that his calm voice couldn't hide, the way his eyes kept tracking movement outside the windows. He was afraid. Not for himself, she realized. For her. This is because of me, Nancy said quietly. Isn't it? They're following us because I exist, Stefano corrected. You just gave them something to target. The distinction felt meaningless. Nancy turned back to the window. The gray car was still behind them, persistent, patient. How far to my apartment? We're not going to your apartment. Nancy's head snapped around. What? It's not safe. I said your car would be delivered there. I didn't say we were going there. Nancy felt panic rising. Real panic this time, sharp and breathless. Where are you taking me? Somewhere they can't reach you. Stefano, trust me. I don't. His gaze held hers. Then trust that I have more to lose than you do if anything happens to that child. The words landed like a physical blow. Nancy opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out because she understood now, truly understood, what she'd walked into. This wasn't about control, wasn't about Stefano being possessive or demanding. This was about survival. His, hers, the life growing inside her. The car turned again, and Nancy stopped trying to track their location, stopped trying to map their route home. Because wherever they were going, it wasn't home, and she had absolutely no say in the matter. Stefano's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then said something to the driver in Italian that made the man's jaw tighten. What? Nancy asked. What is it? Stefano looked at her for a long moment before answering. They know where you live. The penthouse occupied the entire top floor. Nancy noticed the security first. Cameras positioned at subtle angles, reinforced door frames, windows that looked like ordinary glass, but probably weren't. Everything designed to look normal while being anything but. Stefano's hand remained at her back as they entered, guiding, not forcing. She wanted to pull away, wanted to establish boundaries that felt increasingly meaningless. Instead, she stepped inside and tried not to let the space overwhelm her. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. Hardwood floors, clean lines, minimal furniture. Everything expensive in that quiet way where price tags didn't matter because they'd been irrelevant to begin with. But it was the silence that struck her most. Complete, heavy. The kind of quiet that money bought, soundproofing so effective that the city 30 floors below might as well not exist. Guest room is down the hall, Stefano said, removing his suit jacket. Bathroom attached. There's clothing in the closet. Nancy turned to stare at him. Clothing. Yes. In my size. Yes. She wanted to ask how. Wanted to demand explanations for why he had women's clothing in guest room closets. But she was too exhausted to fight about it. Is there a lock on the door? She asked instead. Yes. Will it keep you out? Stefano's gaze held hers. If you want it to. The answer should have been reassuring. Somehow it wasn't. Nancy walked to the windows, keeping distance between them. The city sprawled below, lights beginning to glow as afternoon faded into evening. Normal people heading home from work. Making dinner plans. Living lives that didn't involve armed escorts and cars that followed. How long? She asked. How long what? How long do I have to stay here? Stefano was quiet for a moment. Until it's handled. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. Nancy pressed her palm against the glass. It was cool, solid. She wondered idly if she could break it if she tried. Probably not. I have a job, she said. Responsibilities. A life. All of which can be managed remotely. You can't just expect me to— I don't expect anything, Stefano said quietly. I'm telling you what's necessary. Nancy closed her eyes, breathed, opened them again. Who are they? She asked. The people following us. Competitors. That's a polite word for it. Yes. Nancy turned to face him. And they want what? To hurt you? To hurt me? To leverage you. The distinction felt meaningless. By doing what? Stefano's expression remained neutral. Whatever achieves their goal. Nancy's hand moved to her stomach. The protective gesture was becoming automatic. Which is? Control. Territory. Revenge. Stefano moved to the kitchen area. Open concept. Everything visible. Started making tea without asking if she wanted any. The specifics don't matter. The threat does. And you think keeping me here keeps me safe. I know it does. The certainty in his voice made something twist in Nancy's chest. How many people are watching us right now? Stefano glanced up from the kettle. Security? Yes. 3 on this floor. 2 in the building. 4 monitoring remotely. 9 people. 9 strangers whose job was to make sure she didn't leave, or that no one got in. Nancy wasn't sure which thought was more unsettling. That must be expensive, she said. Yes. And you're doing this because that child is mine, Stefano said simply, and you're carrying it. Nancy wanted to argue, wanted to point out that biology didn't equal ownership, that she'd never asked for protection she didn't want, but she was tired and hungry, and the baby was doing somersaults that made her nauseous. Where's the guest room? She asked. Stefano gestured down the hall. Second door. There's food in the refrigerator. Help yourself. Nancy nodded and started walking, then stopped. Stefano. He looked at her. If I wanted to leave? You won't. But if I did, Stefano held her gaze, then I'd ask you not to, and then I'd make sure you stayed anyway. The honesty was almost refreshing. Nancy continued down the hall without responding. The guest room was smaller than she'd expected, still larger than her entire apartment, but comparatively modest. A queen bed with white linens, a desk, a chair by the window, everything clean and impersonal, like a hotel room designed by someone with too much money and too little imagination. Nancy opened the closet. The clothing was organized by type and color. Maternity wear, comfortable, well-made, exactly her size. Jeans, sweaters, dresses she'd never wear but someone had thought she might need. She pulled out a soft gray sweater and held it up. The fabric was expensive, cashmere probably. The tag was still attached. Everything was new, bought specifically for her, or for whatever woman ended up in this room. Nancy wasn't sure which possibility bothered her more. She changed clothes mechanically, trying not to think too hard about how Stefano knew her size, trying not to wonder how long he'd been planning this. When she emerged 20 minutes later, Stefano was standing by the windows with his phone to his ear, speaking Italian in that low, controlled tone that probably intimidated the person on the other end. He ended the call when he saw her. "Tea's on the counter," he said, "and food." Nancy found a plate, waiting, sandwich, fruit, nothing fancy, but everything she would have chosen herself. The tea was chamomile, prepared exactly how she liked it. She didn't ask how he knew. "You remembered?" she said instead. Stefano's gaze met hers. "I told you? I remember everything." Nancy picked up the mug, grateful for something to do with her hands. "That night. When you left, I didn't want to." The admission surprised her into silence. Stefano continued, voice quiet. "I had to. Business that couldn't wait, but I didn't want to." "You could have said that." "Would you have believed me?" Nancy thought about it. About the woman she'd been 5 months ago, confident in her independence, certain that one night with a stranger was exactly that. One night. "No," she admitted. "Then it wouldn't have mattered." They stood in silence, Nancy sipping tea, Stefano watching her with that unsettling focus she was beginning to recognize. Not threatening, not even uncomfortable, just present. Completely, undeniably present. "Why that night?" Nancy asked suddenly. "Why me?" Stefano was quiet for a long moment. "Because you looked at me like I was human," he said finally. "Not dangerous, not useful. Just human." Nancy's throat felt tight. "You are human. Most people forget that. Maybe you make them forget." Stefano's mouth almost curved. "Maybe." Nancy set down her mug. "I should eat something." "You should rest." "I'm not tired." "You're exhausted." He was right. Nancy hated that he was right. She picked up the sandwich, more to have something to focus on than because she was hungry. The bread was good, fresh. Someone had made this recently. "Do you have staff here?" she asked. "No." "Then who?" "I made it." Nancy stopped chewing, looked at him. Stefano met her gaze evenly. "I can make a sandwich, Nancy." "Mafia bosses don't make sandwiches." "This one does." Something about that image, Stefano Loggia, standing in his pristine kitchen making her food, made Nancy's chest ache in a way she absolutely did not have time to examine. She finished eating in silence, hyper-aware of his presence, even though he wasn't crowding her, wasn't hovering, just existed in the same space, close enough to help if needed, far enough to let her breathe. When she was done, she washed her plate in the sink. Stefano didn't tell her to leave it, didn't offer to do it himself. Just watched. "I'm going to lie down," Nancy said finally. Stefano nodded. "If you need anything, I'll figure it out." His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes suggested he knew she was lying. Nancy retreated to the guest room, closed the door, and tested the lock. It engaged with a solid click. She sat on the bed, then lay back, staring at the ceiling. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She'd almost forgotten she had it. A text from Sarah. "Where are you? You missed our meeting." Nancy stared at the message, tried to formulate a response that wouldn't sound insane. Something came up. "I'll explain later." 3 dots appeared immediately, disappeared, appeared again. "Are you okay?" Nancy looked at the locked door, at the expensive room, at the windows that probably couldn't break. "Yes," she typed, then deleted it. "I don't know," she typed instead, then deleted that too. Finally, "I'll call you tomorrow." She set the phone on the nightstand and closed her eyes. Sleep came faster than expected, exhaustion claiming her despite everything. She dreamed of being followed, of shadows with no faces, of Stefano standing between her and something she couldn't see. When she woke, it was dark. Late evening, maybe, or early night. Nancy lay still, orienting herself. Guest room, penthouse, Stefano's world. Then she heard it. Voices. Low, urgent, not in the room, outside, in the main space. Nancy sat up slowly, heart already accelerating. She moved to the door, pressed her ear against it. "Can't be certain," someone was saying. Male voice. Not Stefano. "I'm certain." That was Stefano. Calm, controlled. "Run it again." "Already did, 3 times, same result." "Then we proceed as if they've been inside already," a third voice finished, "as if they know exactly where she is." Silence. Then Stefano, quieter than before. "How long do we have?" "Best guess? Hours, maybe less." Nancy's hand moved to the door handle, gripped it. Then Stefano's voice, perfectly level, devastating in its certainty. "Then we move her, now." Nancy didn't sleep after that. She sat on the edge of the bed, listening to movement in the other room. Footsteps, doors opening and closing, the low murmur of voices conducting business she wasn't meant to understand. When she finally emerged at 2 a.m, Stefano was alone. He stood by the windows, shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, tie discarded. A glass of something amber sat untouched on the table beside him. He turned when he heard her. Didn't seem surprised. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Can you?" "No." Nancy moved into the kitchen, needing distance and proximity in equal, confusing measure. "Your friends left." "They're not my friends." "What are they?" "Employees." The distinction felt important somehow. Nancy filled a glass with water she didn't want, just to have something to do with her hands. "We're leaving in the morning," Stefano said. "Different location, more secure." "How many more locations do you have?" "Enough." Nancy turned to face him. "Is this what your life is always like? Moving, hiding, looking over your shoulder?" "Yes." "That sounds exhausting." "It is." The honesty surprised her. Nancy leaned against the counter, studying him. He looked tired, not physically, but in some deeper way, like he carried weight she couldn't see. "That night," she said quietly. 5 months ago. Was any of it real?" Stefano's gaze sharpened. "All of it was real." "But you knew who I was. You said you'd looked me up. Found me." "Yes." "Why?" Stefano was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was lower than before. "I saw you 3 weeks before that night, at a gallery opening. You were with a friend, laughing at something. You didn't notice me?" Nancy's breath caught. "I don't remember." "I know. You weren't meant to." Stefano picked up his glass, still didn't drink from it. "You looked happy, uncomplicated, like you existed in a world where danger was theoretical. So you decided to drag me into yours?" "No." Stefano set the glass down. "I decided to visit yours." The words landed softly, devastatingly. Nancy swallowed. "For one night." "I told myself one night was enough." "Was it?" Stefano's eyes met hers. "No." The word hung between them, honest and impossible. Nancy felt her heart doing complicated things. You left at 4 in the morning. Didn't leave a number. I had to leave, Stefano said. Someone had been shot. One of my men. I got the call and I left because that's what I do. You could have said something. What would I have said? Stefano moved closer, just 2 steps, but the space felt smaller suddenly. That I wanted to stay? That I'd been thinking about you for 3 weeks before I finally worked up the courage to approach you like a normal person? Nancy's pulse quickened. You don't seem like someone who lacks courage. I don't lack courage in my world. In yours... He stopped, started again. You made me nervous, Nancy. Genuinely nervous. Do you understand how rare that is? She didn't trust her voice, shook her head instead. I rehearsed what I'd say to you, Stefano continued, something almost vulnerable in his tone. Stood outside that bar for 20 minutes trying to decide if approaching you was selfish or honest. Told myself I'd say hello and nothing more. You said more than hello? You smiled at me, really smiled, like you were glad I'd walked over. Stefano's gaze held hers. I forgot every rule I'd made for myself. Nancy's throat felt tight. That makes 2 of us. Do you regret it? The question was asked quietly, but Nancy heard the weight behind it. I should, she said honestly, but I don't. Something shifted in Stefano's expression. Relief, maybe, or recognition. He moved closer, not crowding, just closing distance. Nancy could smell cedar and something else, could see the faint shadow of exhaustion beneath his eyes. I remember everything about that night, Stefano said softly. The way you laughed at my terrible joke about hospital coffee, the way you argued about whether intention mattered more than outcome, the way you looked at me when I told you my name, like you were deciding whether to run or stay. I almost ran. I know. Why didn't you let me? Because you didn't actually want to run, Stefano said. You wanted someone to give you a reason to stay. Nancy's breath caught. That's presumptuous. Is it wrong? She couldn't answer that. Stefano raised his hand, slowly giving her time to move away, and touched her face. Just his fingertips against her jaw, gentle and deliberate. I've thought about that night every day for 5 months, he said quietly. Told myself it was reckless, dangerous, that I'd put you at risk just by existing near you. Nancy's heart hammered. You did put me at risk. I know. And now I'm carrying proof of exactly how reckless we both were. Yes. His thumb brushed her cheekbone. Nancy felt herself leaning into the touch without conscious decision. I should push you away, she whispered. Yes. Tell you this is insane. It is. That I can't. That we can't. Stefano leaned closer. His forehead almost touched hers. Nancy's eyes drifted closed. Nancy, he murmured. Don't, she breathed. Don't say it. Say what? Whatever you're about to say that makes this feel inevitable. Stefano's hand curved against her neck, thumb resting against her pulse point. What if it is inevitable? Then we're both in trouble. We're already in trouble. Nancy opened her eyes, found him watching her with an intensity that made her chest ache. If I kiss you, Stefano said softly, I won't be able to walk away twice. Who says I want you to walk away? Something dangerous flickered in his eyes. Nancy! The window exploded. Glass shattered inward in a crystalline wave, followed immediately by the sharp crack of gunfire. Stefano moved instantly, his body covering hers, forcing her down, shielding her completely as 3 more shots punched through the reinforced glass. Nancy couldn't breathe, couldn't think past the weight of him pressing her into the floor, solid and protective and utterly focused. Stay down, he ordered, voice sharp and commanding in a way she'd never heard before. More shots, closer now. Stefano's hand found his phone, pressed something. Alarms erupted, sharp, insistent, everywhere at once. Nancy's ears were ringing. Her hands instinctively curved over her stomach. "Don't move," Stefano said again, shifting slightly but never exposing her. "Don't make a sound." She nodded against the floor, tasting fear and adrenaline. Footsteps pounded in the corridor outside, doors burst open, and Nancy realized with cold, terrible clarity they'd found her anyway. The shooting stopped. Nancy remained pressed against the floor, Stefano's weight still covering her, his breathing controlled despite the chaos. She could feel his heartbeat, steady, unhurried, like gunfire through windows was just another Tuesday. "Clear," someone called from the doorway. Stefano didn't move immediately. His hand came to rest briefly against Nancy's head, checking, she realized, making sure she was intact. "Are you hurt?" he asked quietly. Nancy shook her head, not trusting her voice. Only then did he shift, rising smoothly and pulling her up with him. His hands remained on her arms, steadying her even as he scanned the room with clinical precision. 3 men stood in the doorway, weapons drawn, not pointed at her, pointed out, toward threats she couldn't see. "Perimeter?" Stefano asked. "Contained. 2 shooters. Rooftop across the street. Alive? 1 is." The words were delivered matter-of-factly, like reporting the weather. Nancy felt something cold settle in her stomach. Stefano's jaw tightened. "Bring him down." The men disappeared. Nancy stood motionless, glass crunching under her feet, staring at the shattered window. Cold air poured in, carrying the smell of gunpowder and city night. "Nancy." Stefano's voice pulled her back. "Look at me." She did. Saw something in his expression she couldn't name. Concern, maybe? Or calculation. "I need you to go to the guest room," he said. "Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me." "What are you going to do?" "What needs to be done?" Nancy's hands curled into fists. "That's not an answer." "It's the only one you're getting." Stefano guided her toward the hallway, gentle but unyielding. "Please." "Nancy, just this once, don't argue." She wanted to demand explanations, assurances, anything that made this feel less like a nightmare. But his eyes held something that stopped her. Not threat, not anger, fear. For her. Nancy nodded and walked to the guest room on unsteady legs. She locked the door and stood in the center of the room, listening. 20 minutes later she heard voices, muffled, intense, coming from somewhere deeper in the penthouse, a room she hadn't seen yet. Nancy pressed her ear against the door. "Don't care what they offered you," Stefano's voice colder than she'd ever heard it. "You took their money. You told them where to find her." A pause, then another voice, younger, desperate. "I didn't know. They said it was just surveillance." "You knew enough. Please, Mr. Loja. I have a family." "So does she." Stefano's voice dropped to something quieter, more dangerous. "The woman you just put in the crosshairs is carrying my child. So when you talk about family, understand that you tried to end mine." Silence. Nancy's breath caught. "Who else?" Stefano continued. "Who else did they pay?" "I don't know, I swear." "Wrong answer." A sound Nancy couldn't identify. Sharp, brief. Then crying. Nancy stepped back from the door, pulse hammering. This was Stefano's world. This was what protection looked like when the veneer came off. She moved to the window, needing air, needing space, needing anything but the sound of someone begging in the next room. The window didn't open. Of course it didn't. When Stefano knocked an hour later, Nancy almost didn't unlock the door, but she did. He stood in the hallway, shirt sleeves still rolled up, no blood visible but something dark in his eyes that suggested he'd washed his hands recently. "It's handled," he said. "What does that mean?" "It means you're safe." "For how long?" Stefano's expression didn't change. "As long as I'm breathing." Nancy wanted to scream. Wanted to laugh, wanted to ask him if he understood how terrifying that promise was. "The man," she said quietly, "the one who betrayed you. What happened to him? He's alive. Where?" "Somewhere he can't hurt you again." Nancy's hands trembled. "You tortured him." It wasn't a question. Stefano didn't deny it. He gave you information, Nancy continued, working through it. Names, locations, whatever you needed. Yes. And now I use that information to end this. The certainty in his voice made her skin crawl. By doing what? Killing them? If necessary. Nancy felt bile rise in her throat. You say that like it's normal. In my world, it is. I don't want to live in your world. Stefano was quiet for a long moment. You don't have a choice anymore. The words landed like a verdict. Nancy pushed past him, needing distance. She made it 3 steps before his voice stopped her. I didn't ask for this either. She turned. What? You think I wanted this? Stefano's control cracked slightly, just at the edges. You think I wanted to care about someone so much that their safety becomes the only thing that matters? That I'd torture a man I've known for 6 years just to find out who else might hurt them? Nancy's breath caught. I built this life on control, Stefano continued, voice rough. On certainty, on making decisions without emotion. And then you walked into a hospital, 5 months pregnant, and I realized I'd already lost before I knew there was a game. I'm not a game. No, you're so much worse. Stefano moved closer. You're the only thing I can't afford to lose. Nancy felt tears prick her eyes. You can't love me into a cage and call it protection. I can, if it keeps you alive. That's not love. That's control. Maybe in my world, they're the same thing. The honesty of it was brutal. Nancy turned away, unable to look at him. I need air. You can't leave. I know. The words tasted like ash. Believe me, I know. Nancy didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to Stefano pace in the next room. Back and forth like a caged animal, or a man who'd realized his cage had a door he couldn't control. By dawn, Nancy had made a decision. She couldn't stay here, couldn't raise a child in this world of violence and protection that felt indistinguishable from imprisonment. She'd leave. Somehow, find a way out of the city, out of the country if necessary, disappear so thoroughly that even Stefano's resources couldn't find her. It was impossible, probably, suicidal, definitely, but staying felt like dying slowly. Nancy pulled out her phone, hands shaking, started searching for information she'd need, bus routes, border crossings, places where people vanished. She was so focused on the screen that she didn't hear the door open, didn't realize Stefano was standing there until he spoke. Planning a trip? Nancy's head snapped up. Stefano leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, expression unreadable. But his eyes held something that made her chest tighten. Not anger, disappointment. How long have you been standing there? Nancy asked, voice unsteady. Long enough. Stefano stepped into the room. Were you going to tell me? Or just disappear? Nancy's hands curled around her phone. Does it matter? Yes. Why? You'd just stop me anyway. Probably, Stefano agreed. But I'd rather you be honest about wanting to leave than lie about staying. Nancy felt something break inside her chest. I can't do this, Stefano. I can't live like this. Like what? Like a prisoner. Like someone who needs permission to breathe. Stefano moved closer, crouching in front of her so they were eye level. You're not my prisoner. Then let me go. No. Nancy's breath hitched. You can't keep me here. Watch me. The certainty in his voice was absolute. Nancy looked away, tears finally spilling over. This isn't love. Maybe not, Stefano said quietly, but it's all I know how to give. He stood, pulled her phone gently from her hands, and looked at the screen. His expression hardened. Mexico, he read. Cash-only hostels, fake identification services. His gaze lifted to hers. You were serious. Yes. Stefano pocketed her phone. Not anymore. Nancy surged to her feet. You can't just... I can. Stefano's voice remained maddeningly calm. And I will. Because if you run, Nancy, you won't make it past the city limits before they find you. And when they do... He stopped. Didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Nancy sank back onto the bed, defeated. Stefano watched her for a long moment. Something unreadable in his expression. Then he turned and walked to the door. Paused. For what it's worth, he said quietly, not looking back. I understand why you want to leave. I'd probably try the same thing. Then why won't you let me? Stefano's hand tightened on the door frame. Because I already know how this story ends if you go, he said. And I'm not strong enough to let that happen. The door closed softly behind him. Nancy heard the lock engage from the outside. She was alone, and for the first time since this started, she understood exactly how trapped she really was. The lock disengaged 3 hours later. Nancy looked up from where she sat by the window, expecting Stefano. Instead, a woman stood in the doorway, 40-something, elegant in a way that spoke of old money and older secrets, dark hair pulled back severely, eyes that assessed Nancy with clinical precision. Ms. Arnold, the woman said, my name is Teresa Loggia, Stefano's aunt. Nancy stood slowly. He didn't mention you. He wouldn't. Teresa stepped inside, closing the door behind her. May I sit? Nancy gestured to the chair, wary. Teresa settled gracefully, studying Nancy with unsettling focus. You're younger than I expected. Is that a problem? That depends. Teresa's gaze dropped to Nancy's stomach. On whether you understand what you've done to him. Nancy's jaw tightened. I didn't do anything to him. No? Teresa's mouth curved slightly. You made him vulnerable. In our world, that's a death sentence. Then maybe he shouldn't have what? Felt something? Wanted something beyond this life? Teresa leaned forward slightly. My nephew has spent 15 years building walls around himself. You walked through them in a single night. Nancy didn't know what to say to that. There's a car waiting downstairs, Teresa continued quietly. Back entrance. No security. Money in the account I've just transferred to your phone. The one Stefano took from you is in his office safe. Combination 1405. Nancy's breath caught. What? May 14th, Teresa said. The night you met. He's sentimental in ways he'd never admit. Why are you telling me this? Teresa stood, smoothing her skirt. Because I love my nephew, and because you're going to destroy him if you stay. He won't let me leave. He will if he thinks it's necessary. Teresa moved to the door, paused. There's going to be a meeting in 20 minutes. Every man in this building will be occupied. You'll have a 10-minute window. Use it. Nancy's pulse hammered. You're betraying him. No, Teresa said softly. I'm saving him. There's a difference. The door closed. Nancy stood frozen. Mind racing. 10 minutes. That's all she'd have. She moved quickly, changing into clothes that wouldn't stand out. Found her phone's last known location using the laptop left in the room, Stefano's office, like Teresa said. The combination worked. Her phone was there, along with cash she hadn't expected. Documents. A passport that wasn't hers but had her photo. He'd been prepared for this. For her running. Nancy's hands shook as she pocketed everything. She made it to the stairwell, down 3 flights, and found Stefano standing at the landing. He didn't look surprised. Teresa, he said quietly. I wondered when she'd make her move. Nancy's heart stopped. You knew? I've known for 2 days that someone in my inner circle was planning something. Stefano's voice remained calm, but something dangerous lurked beneath it. I didn't know it was family. She's trying to help you. By helping you leave? Stefano moved closer. That's not help, Nancy. That's strategy. Nancy backed against the wall. I can't stay here. I know. The admission surprised her into silence. Stefano stopped 3 feet away. I know you can't stay, that this world will suffocate you. That every day here costs you something I can't repay. Then let me go. I can't? His voice cracked slightly. I physically cannot make myself let you walk away knowing what's waiting out there. Nothing's waiting. Everything is waiting. Stefano's control finally splintered. You think Teresa's betrayal is the only one? You think I haven't been hunting a leak for weeks? Someone in my organization has been feeding information to the Calabrese family, someone close enough to know about you. Nancy felt ice in her veins. Who? I don't know yet. But when I find out... He stopped, breathed. If you leave now, whoever it is will know within the hour, and they will use you to end me. So I'm bait. You're leverage, there's a difference. Nancy's eyes burned. I never asked to be either. I know. Stefano moved closer, voice dropping. I know you didn't ask for any of this, but I'm asking now. Stay, not in a cage, not as a prisoner, as... He stopped. Nancy's breath caught. As what? As someone I love, Stefano said quietly. Even though I have no right to, even though it's the most selfish thing I've ever admitted. The words hung between them, raw and impossible. Nancy felt tears spill over. That's not fair. No, but it's honest. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him love wasn't supposed to feel like drowning, but she couldn't, because some traitorous part of her had known for weeks that she loved him back. Footsteps pounded above them, urgent, multiple. Stefano's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and something in his expression turned to stone. What? Nancy asked. Marco. Stefano's voice went flat. He's been with me for 8 years. Since I was 25. Stefano. He just accessed the security system, disabled the south cameras. Stefano looked at her, something terrible in his eyes. He's letting them in. Nancy's blood went cold. How many? Enough. Stefano moved past her, back up the stairs, not running, walking with purpose that felt more dangerous than panic. Nancy followed. What are you going to do? He didn't answer. They reached the main floor. Men were gathering. Stefano's men, weapons appearing with practiced efficiency. Teresa stood near the window, face pale. Stefano, I know. Stefano's voice held no warmth, no anger, just certainty. But you gave her the opportunity, and that's enough. He pulled out his phone, pressed a single contact. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. The penthouse became a fortress in under 2 minutes. Nancy watched from the corner where Stefano had positioned her, behind reinforced walls, protected by 2 men whose names she didn't know but whose competence was evident in their silence. Stefano stood in the center of the room, phone to his ear, speaking rapid Italian. His voice remained level, controlled, like he was arranging dinner reservations instead of preparing for war. Marco, he said into the phone, switching to English. I know you're listening. Silence on the line. Then, Stefano, I can explain. You disabled the south cameras 19 minutes ago. You've been on Calabrese's payroll for 6 months. You told them about Nancy 3 weeks ago. Stefano's tone didn't change. What's left to explain? They have my sister. I know. I've had people watching her since yesterday. She's safe now. Stefano moved to the window, looking down at the street below. You should have come to me. I couldn't. You could have. You chose not to. Stefano's jaw tightened. How many are coming? A pause. 12. Maybe 15. Armed? Yes. When? They're already in the building. Stefano ended the call, turned to his men. 3 teams, stairwells and elevator. No one gets past the 20th floor. They moved immediately, silent and efficient. Only one remained with Nancy, older, gray at the temples, eyes that had seen too much. I'm Victor, he said quietly. I won't let anything happen to you. Nancy nodded, not trusting her voice. Stefano approached, crouching in front of her. Stay here. Don't move unless Victor tells you to. Where are you going? To end this. Nancy grabbed his wrist. You said 12 people. You have What? 8 men here? 7 now. That's not enough. It will be. Stefano covered her hand with his. Trust me. I do. That's the problem. Something softened in his expression. He leaned forward, pressed his forehead to hers briefly. This ends tonight, one way or another. Then he was gone. Nancy counted the minutes by her heartbeat. Distantly, she heard sounds, sharp cracks that might have been gunfire or doors slamming, shouting in Italian, something heavy hitting the floor. Victor stood motionless by the door, weapon drawn, listening. Is he winning? Nancy whispered. Mr. Loggia doesn't lose. It wasn't an answer, but it was something. More sounds. Closer now. Victor's posture shifted slightly. Get behind the desk. Nancy moved, pressing herself against solid wood, hands protectively over her stomach. The door burst open. Not Stefano. A man she didn't recognize, blood on his shirt, wild-eyed and desperate. Victor fired once. The man dropped. Nancy bit back a scream. Stay down, Victor ordered, moving to check the corridor. He didn't see the second man until too late. The shot caught Victor in the shoulder, spinning him back. He returned fire even as he fell, and the attacker collapsed. Then silence. Nancy's ears rang. Her breathing came too fast, too shallow. Victor was on the ground, conscious but bleeding. Go, he gasped. Back room. Lock yourself. Footsteps in the hallway. Nancy froze. Stefano appeared in the doorway, and Nancy's chest loosened until she saw the blood. His left side, dark and spreading. His face pale but composed. He moved like the injury didn't exist, but Nancy saw the way he favored his right side. Victor, Stefano said calmly. Status? Through and through, I'm fine. Stefano moved to Nancy, checking her with his eyes before his hands. You're okay? I'm fine. You're shot. Grazed. That's not grazed. Nancy. His voice held exhaustion she'd never heard before. I'm fine. He wasn't. She could see it in the way he breathed, shallow and careful, in the slight tremor in his hands that he couldn't quite control. How many? She asked. Down? All of them. Stefano moved to help Victor up. Alive? 4. Including Marco. And the Calabrese family? Stefano's expression went cold. Being handled as we speak. Nancy understood, didn't ask for details. She watched Stefano help Victor to a chair, watched him press gauze to the wound with steady hands despite his own injury, watched him make 3 phone calls organizing cleanup, medical attention, consequences. His control never wavered, until it did. He swayed slightly, caught himself against the desk. Nancy was at his side immediately. Sit down. I'm fine. You're bleeding everywhere. Sit down. Stefano sat, more from exhaustion than obedience. Nancy pulled up his shirt, saw the wound, long, deep, still bleeding despite his attempts to ignore it. This needs stitches. I know. Actual medical stitches, from a doctor. I know. But he didn't move, just sat there, looking at her with something raw in his eyes. I would have killed them all, he said quietly, if they'd touched you. I would have burned the entire Calabrese organization to the ground. Nancy's hands shook as she pressed gauze to his side. I know. That should terrify you. It does. She met his gaze. But not the way you think. Stefano reached up, cupped her face with his uninjured hand. I meant what I said. I love you. Even though... Nancy felt it then. Sharp, sudden pain low in her abdomen. She gasped, hand flying to her stomach. Stefano's expression transformed instantly. Nancy? Something's wrong. The pain intensified, spreading. Something's wrong with the baby. Stefano was moving before she finished speaking, phone out, barking orders. Get the car, now. Call Dr. Rivera. Tell her we're coming in. He pulled Nancy to her feet carefully, supporting her weight. Stefano, I can't... Yes, you can. His voice was steady despite the blood, despite everything. Stay with me. Just stay with me. The pain peaked, and Nancy felt wetness between her legs. Her vision blurred. Nancy! Stefano's voice cut through the fog. Look at me. Stay awake. She tried. Failed. The last thing she heard was Stefano's voice, rough with fear, saying her name like a prayer he didn't know how to finish. Nancy woke to the smell of hospital disinfectant and broken promises. Full circle. Stefano sat beside her bed, still in his blood-stained shirt, stitches visible at his side where someone had finally forced him to accept medical attention. His hand wrapped around hers, thumb tracing absent patterns on her knuckles. He looked exhausted. Human. The baby? Nancy's voice came out rough. Fine. Completely fine. Stefano's grip tightened. Stress-induced contractions. You're on bed rest for 48 hours, then modified activity until delivery. Nancy let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. And you? 23 stitches. I'll survive. Will you? The question held more weight than injury counts. Stefano was quiet for a moment. Marco's sister is safe. He's facing consequences, but not the kind you're imagining. The Calabrese family... He stopped. They're no longer a concern. Nancy didn't ask what that meant. Teresa? She asked instead. On a plane to Sicily. Indefinite exile. Stefano's voice held something that might have been regret. She acted out of love. But love doesn't erase betrayal. Nancy understood that now, had lived it, was still living it. I tried to leave, she said quietly. I know. I might try again. I know that too. Nancy turned to look at him. And? Stefano met her gaze, something raw and honest in his expression. And I'll spend every day giving you reasons to stay. Not walls, not control, just reasons. That sounds exhausting. It does, doesn't it? His mouth almost curved. But I've spent 15 years building an empire on fear. Maybe it's time I tried building something on choice instead. Nancy felt tears prick her eyes. I'm still afraid. Good. So am I. Stefano brought her hand to his lips, pressed a kiss to her knuckles. But I'm more afraid of a life without you in it than I am of anything my enemies can do. That's not rational. No, but it's honest. A nurse entered, checked monitors with practiced efficiency. Baby's heartbeat is strong. You're both doing well. After she left, Nancy said, I want conditions. Stefano waited. I want to know what's happening, not details that will haunt me, but enough to understand the risks. I want agency over my own life, where I go, who I see. I want our child to have choices I didn't have. Done? Just like that? Nancy, you could ask me to walk away from everything I've built. And I'd consider it. Stefano's voice was quiet, certain. Whatever you need to stay, to choose this, I'll find a way. I need you to promise me something else. What? Nancy's free hand moved to her stomach, protective and possessive. That when this baby is born, you'll show them the man I saw that night. Not the one who locked me in rooms, the one who made terrible jokes and admitted he was nervous. Stefano's throat worked. That man is a lie. No, he's the truth you're afraid of. Silence stretched between them, heavy with possibility. Finally, Stefano nodded. I promise. Nancy believed him, not because she was naive, but because she'd seen him bleed for her, seen him choose her over power, seen him afraid. So what happens now? She asked. Now? Stefano shifted carefully, mindful of his stitches. Now we figure out how to be a family, however imperfect that looks. In your world. In our world, he corrected, because it's yours now too, for better or worse. Nancy thought about that, about gunshots and betrayals and men who loved through protection instead of freedom, about a child who would grow up knowing their father was both dangerous and devoted, about choosing the complicated truth over the simple lie. Okay, she said finally. Okay. Okay. Nancy squeezed his hand. But if you ever lock me in a room again without asking, I'm stealing every expensive suit you own and donating them to charity. Stefano's laugh was quiet, genuine. Deal. 2 months later, Nancy stood on the same balcony where this had started, one hand resting on her belly, the other wrapped in Stefano's. The city sprawled below, beautiful and dangerous and indifferent. I can't believe we're doing this, she said. Stefano pulled her closer, careful of her now obvious pregnancy. Having regrets? Every single day. Good, me too. Nancy looked up at him, saw the man she'd met 6 months ago and the man he'd become for her. Saw the future they were building. Imperfect, complicated, honest. The baby's kicking, she said. Stefano's hand moved to feel it, and something softened in his expression that made Nancy's chest ache. Strong, he murmured, like their father. Stubborn like their mother. Nancy smiled despite herself. We're going to ruin this child. Probably. Stefano pressed a kiss to her temple. But at least they'll know they were wanted. Nancy leaned into him, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her back. The weight of his protection that had stopped feeling like a cage. What are you thinking? Stefano asked quietly. Nancy looked out at the city, at the life they'd chosen, the dangerous, impossible, honest life. That this world might not be safe, she said, but it's ours. Stefano's arms tightened around her, protective and possessive, and promised. Yes, he said against her hair, and I'll burn it all down before I let anyone take it from us.